USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to the Weekend Review podcast for Monday, February 10th, 2020. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. This episode is sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. Jim, let's start with the game of the week. It was a great series, Penn State and Ohio State, and a split of points, but Penn State coming away with 4 out of the 6 points on the weekend.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the Saturday night's game was a real gut check, I think, for Penn State. You know, they lose in extra time, only getting 1 point on Friday, and then finding a way. They jumped out to a 3-0 lead and watched as that lead got chipped away a little bit, but then they find a way to get a couple of empty netters. They showed that they could bend a little, didn't break. They got 4 out of 6 points on the weekend. That puts them into solo first place in the Big Ten. And, you know, for Penn State, I just feel like mentally, if you lose that game on Saturday, it would be so easy to mentally check out. Instead, they come back with a big effort, find a way to close it out against a resilient Ohio State team, and they showed that their gut was there at the right time.
Well, that puts Penn State all alone in first place in the Big Ten. The other big one on the weekend, Michigan, which continues to be a hot team, the Wolverines, sweeping the Badgers, who have to be the big disappointment in the Big Ten this season.
There's no doubt about that. But for Michigan, just the ability to stay hot and getting hot at the right time. And you always hear coaches talk about it as, you know, the league championship at the end is never about the best team. It's about the hottest team. And a good coach knows that the best time of the year to get hot is somewhere around early February, and then you can ride that in and through March. And right now, that's exactly what Michigan and Mel Pearson's team is doing. 2 wins this weekend. They had a split last weekend with Ohio State. They had, 4 wins in either regulation or overtime. Leading into that, so that's a 6-2-1 stretch over there. That's a really good stretch right now for Michigan. They have to be feeling positive about themselves after such a horrible first half, but they've hit the reset button somehow. And Michigan, they're not exactly right there. They're not going to compete likely for the Big Ten title, but no one should want to play them in the Big Ten tournament.
And maybe they won't compete, but they're still only a weekend sweep away from first place in the league. Penn State with 33 points, a 3-way tie with 31 points for Michigan State, Minnesota, and Ohio State. Notre Dame with 28, Michigan with 27, and then Wisconsin 10 points back of Michigan. The Badgers pretty much out of the running in the Big Ten, but a terrific stretch there for Mel Pearson's Wolverines. Well, let's turn to the NCHC, and one big weekend sweep there was number 6 Minnesota Duluth over Omaha, 3-2 and 4-1 wins. But the big news on that one, besides keeping Minnesota Duluth nipping at the heels of North Dakota for first place in the NCHC, is that has put UMD in a terrific place in the PairWise.
Yeah, they've jumped all the way up to 4th, and that's obviously people that understand the PairWise know that would be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament if the season ended today. It's also, we'll maybe talk about it a little bit later, but it's also helped other teams that have played and had success against Minnesota Duluth this season. I always point to UMass Lowell. They won the first game of the year, and it's easy to forget about that game way back in the second week of October. But for them, for the Riverhawks, they got a nice boost to their pairwise because of how successful Minnesota Duluth has been. And as you mentioned, now the Bulldogs, they have put themselves in position. They're going to at least keep North Dakota honest. We thought that North Dakota might just run away with this conference. They're within 2 points. North Dakota's got 2 games in hand, but it's going to be more of a battle. I thought that this easily could have been a runaway for North Dakota, but Minnesota Duluth, they're going to be the only team that's going to have a chance to chase them, but they're showing that they're going to chase them right down to the final week.
The Fighting Hawks, who face Denver this coming weekend, still have 2 games in hand with Minnesota Duluth. So those 2 points may be just a little bit deceptive, but still, Duluth and North Dakota have kind of positioned themselves as the top two in the league, with Denver and Western Michigan a good 10 points behind Minnesota Duluth, and St. Cloud still in good reach for a possible home series in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough. There are going to be races down the stretch here, and that's what I think we'll be really watching. And it could be, as I said, we could have a nice little battle between two teams for first place, but all the rest of the races that are going to go on throughout this league, St. Cloud, they have kind of picked themselves up by the bootstraps. They're somewhat relevant again. They're now at least trying to fight for home ice, and they'll try to push Denver and Western Michigan for that spot.
Well, we continue with the Western Leagues in the WCHA. A blowout and a nail-biter for Minnesota State, 7-3 and 1-0 over number 15 Northern Michigan. And the Mavericks are just running away with the WCHA, and that keeps them very solid in the pairwise, too.
Yeah, what just amazes me, is what you just mentioned. They have found ways to win games in many different forms. They can win that 1-0 game, and they can also take control of games when they feel that they can seize control. They keep scoring and scoring. The ability to win a 1-0 game, though, your goaltender Dryden McKay has to be very solid, and he has been all year. When I look at goaltenders in the Hobey Baker race, he's really the one that's standing out to me right now. He has a real shot, not just being a top 10 finalist. He could be top 3, and his numbers right now are so good that if he were to be really talked about as a winner of this award, I would not be surprised, because as we've watched this season, some of the players that got started off really hot at the skater position, whether forward or defense, they've cooled off a little bit. So suddenly you're going to think about a guy like Dryden McKay, and you're going to be talking Hobey Baker at the end of the year, and he's got to be given a lot of serious consideration.
Elsewhere around the WCHA, a weekend sweep for Bowling Green, a split with Lake Superior for Michigan Tech. And both Tech and Bowling Green on the outside for home ice in the first round of the WCHA playoffs, but still within reach. The team that is sitting right now sort of in the catbird seat in fourth in that is Alaska, as they've had a pretty good season in conference this year.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned that both Tech and Bowling Green are in a position to catch Alaska and maybe take over that final spot. And I'll tell you, if you're either one of those teams, if you're unable to catch Alaska, the last thing you want to do is maybe put yourself in fifth place and have to travel to Alaska for the opening series. But I look at the way that Alaska's schedule shakes out. This could be a big weekend coming up because they have Bowling Green on the schedule at home. They didn't get a weekend off, and they'll close against Alaska Anchorage with the Governor's Cup Series. So, and that's the other thing about that. You're closing with your rival. And despite the fact that this has been a down year for Alaska Anchorage, that series easily could go either way. So there's no guarantees for Alaska, but they certainly are in good position. I think they might give up some games in hand. But this weekend, I think, against Bowling Green becomes a really big series for them if they're trying to clinch home ice.
Well, there was a lot of interesting action in the eastern half of college hockey over the weekend, and we'll get to that in a moment. First, a word from this episode's sponsor, the NCAA Frozen Four, coming up April 9th and 11th in Detroit.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Every time you show up, every time you make your presence heard, whether you clap your hands or stomp your feet, lead the chant or join the chorus, however you choose to be a fan, you make the game. The NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th at Little Caesars Arena in Detroit. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 to get your tickets today.
Continuing now with a Weekend Review podcast for February 10th, 2020. I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly. Jim, Hockey East is really shaping up to be an interesting race down to the wire, and the most surprising team out of all of it has to be Maine. We've been talking about Maine the last couple of weeks. We've had Red Gendron on as a guest. Maine had a single game on Friday, and they beat number 12 Northeastern 4-2 at home. this has put them in a great position in the Hockey East standings, and even more surprisingly in the pairwise.
And they have won 5 straight. It began with those 2 overtime wins against Boston College. That, at the time, they were in 10th place in Hockey East. They have since moved up to 3rd. They are now 7-1-1 since the break. They are 10-0-2 at home, where all but one of their remaining games will be played. And as you mentioned, they are now relevant in the pairwise. They are above the bubble. And I believe when we came back from break, I said that they were 32 in the pairwise. So they've climbed 19 spots in the pairwise in a span of less than 2 months. And that is just remarkable. It shows that just how well this Maine team is playing right now. They are dangerous, and Orono is alive, and that's a big part of it. You're now going to go up to Orono, and you're not going to be playing in front of 2,000 or 3,000 fans anymore. This is now becoming the hot ticket in town. It's now getting back to the old Alfond Arena environment that people remember and used to call the greatest college hockey environment out there. Well, here it is. It is back, and it will be a very tough challenge for any team that is left to go up to Alfond Arena.
And the remaining schedule for the Black Bears, they've got Vermont twice, Yukon twice at home, and home with Providence. 5 out of 6 at home, and they're 10-0-2 at home right now this season. You got to like the chances for Maine to get near the top, if not winning Hockey East outright, if you can believe it. It's been a terrific season that snuck up on everybody for Maine.
Yeah, it certainly did for me, and I did not realize how difficult their schedule was really out of the gate. And they played some pretty good hockey at times, but then I think as we got in toward Christmas time, I was saying, yeah, this team doesn't have it. Nice try. They've got a great goaltender and they've got a good first line, but now we're learning that they've got a good first line, a good second line, an elite goaltender, and this team can pull some wins out. They're playing really good hockey. I mean, Northeastern goes up, trailed most of the game on Friday. And then when they finally started to get back in, I believe it was 3-1 in the third, Northeastern scores to make it 3-2, and boom, Maine, less than 30 seconds later, it's 4-2. And they just have the ability to be responsive. I like a lot about this team. I mentioned in the press box at the Bean Pot last week that I could see Maine winning it. And I almost laughed out of the TD Garden for saying that. But I think people are starting to realize this Maine team is darn good, and their schedule is very favorable down the stretch.
Elsewhere in Hockey East, both of the UMass schools did pretty well on the weekend with sweeps. UMass Lowell 3-2 over BC, ranked number 4 on Friday, and hung on to down Merrimack on Saturday. And over at #flagship in Amherst, UMass with home wins and some convincing ones over number 10 Providence, the number 8 Minutemen, finally getting off the scoring schneid.
And that was important, I'll tell you, for UMass to get some of that confidence back. They hadn't been scoring goals, and that's one of those things. This is a team that has a lot of offensive capability to sort of struggle to score is a big problem, especially this time of year. But they get 2 against Providence and a home. That has to build your confidence. For UMass Lowell, they stayed right in this race. They easily could have been in a pretty bad position. Last weekend, they had a bye week, and teams started passing them or could have passed them, and the way wins and losses shook out, nothing really happened that was detrimental while they were off. And then they come back, they play down at BC on Friday, fall behind, find a way to win, and then on Saturday they jump out to a 4-1 lead and kind of had to survive after a lackluster third period at Merrimack, but they got that win, and next thing you know, they're back in the pairwise in the top 11, I believe, and they're also right there 2 points behind UMass. The big series in Hockey East will be not this weekend upcoming, but a week from now, UMass Lowell, a home series. It's a battle of the sister schools, and trust me, I think most of the fans in Lowell are ready to say we're the flagship.
Well, when we looked to the ECAC, it was a light schedule, much like Hockey East, in part because of the Bean Pot, but just sort of a light weekend in the schedule. Clarkson kept up its winning ways with a win at its rival St. Lawrence, and delayed by a day because of nasty weather in upstate New York, Cornell sweeping a home with Colgate. Those two locked together at the top of the ECAC standings.
here we are. I mean, we're going to go down to the last few weeks, and this is a good battle. These are two teams that have played well all season. I think everybody had them 1-2 in their ballots pretty much going into this season. So they're the good story, and they're gonna battle it out. Quinnipiac, they only got 3 out of 4 this weekend, and I say only because it's one of those things that I think they might have expected the sweep, and then that puts them 4 points behind. Can they get there and put their name into this race, if you will, for first place? Maybe. I don't see it. I think that it's going to be a battle between Clarkson and Cornell. And really, if there's going to be any battle, maybe we'll see one between Colgate and Harvard for who gets 4th place in that final bye and quarterfinal home ice position.
Don't count out Dave Smith's Rensselaer Engineers either. They're sitting with 17 points tied with Colgate.
True.
They have had a very good season so far this year, maybe a little bit of a pleasant surprise in the ECAC.
Yeah, non-league hasn't been that kind to them, but within ECAC play, 8-7-1. Like you said, they're right there. They're tied with Colgate right now, just 4 points behind Harvard, and it could be a pretty good 3-way battle as we get down. And I don't think I see Quinnipiac falling, but if they were to slip a little bit, it could be 4 teams battling for 2 spots in the final buys and home ice in the quarterfinals.
When we turn to Atlantic hockey, that's turning out to be a pretty good race. A single game, Army at Bentley, a 4-1 win for Bentley before they lost the next night to Arizona State. We'll get to Arizona State in a moment. RIT picked up 4 of 6 points on the road at Robert Morris, and Canisius a good weekend at home, 5 out of 6 points against Atlantic hockey, and that means things are pretty tight in the AHA. They're trying to get into the top 4 of the teams in that league, and right now AIC and Sacred Heart, who play on Tuesday in a single game at AIC, tied with 46 points. Army 6 points behind with 40. Nipping at the heels of Army is RIT with 38, but the Tigers have 2 games in hand against them. And right on the tail of RIT is Bentley, who travels to RIT for a pair this weekend. So, and right behind that, our Air Force and Robert Morris, Niagara Canisius still within reach, as our Holy Cross. You could see some real changes in the standings as you get down to the last weekend. It's going to be a great race I'd say a great race for third on down. AIC and Sacred Heart are almost out of reach unless they collapse.
And then, Tuesday night's game doesn't become a de facto regular season championship game. There's still plenty of hockey to play after that. But when these two teams are going to get together, somebody is going to, thanks to the 3-point system and forced overtime and shootouts, somebody will be ahead after Tuesday night. We know that much. The question is, are they able to hold on when all is said and done? After that, as you said, I always think this is such an interesting league because you have different battles. You're trying to get to 4th so that you can host in the second round. You get to host in the quarterfinals. You're trying to get to 5th so you don't have to play in the first round, but then you're going to the 4th seed. And then everybody else, that little battle for 8th and 9th to see who can be the teams that can get to host the 3 teams that will host in the first round. And as you just kind of ran down those standings, those are real battles all the way along. You're not going to have an easy battle between all the way from 3rd to 5th and then, really 5th on down to 10th. Everybody's right, separated by less than 2 games. So it's tight. It's what Atlantic hockey is kind of known for. They, having that extra battle or 2 in there of what can happen with your fate, first round, bye, home, road, all that stuff. That adds a little bit more to the excitement.
Well, and the big thing about getting out of the first round, the coaches in the league will tell you, you don't want to play in the first round if you can help it, because there's always at least one upset, if not more, in the first round in that conference.
Yeah, and it also, having to play that first round can be wearing. If you have to play a 3-game series that finishes up on a Sunday, and then you're going to travel somewhere, it might not be a close trip. If you're, say, Air Force, and you've got to, play 3 games in Colorado Springs, win that, and then you have to head on the road to, say, Bentley, that can be a long trip, and it's what you want to try to avoid as much as you possibly can. So those top 5 spots are really big, and then really the top 4, because you'd still rather play a quarterfinal series at home rather than on the road.
Well, we talked about how important the wins were down the stretch for Arizona State in the PairWise. They won both of the games over the weekend, a 3-2 overtime win. Maybe a little controversy on the game-winning goal at Holy Cross, and then a 3-0 shutout. the next night at Bentley. Despite that, Arizona State dropped from 8th to 10th in the pairwise.
Just one of those moments. That's what makes the pairwise so dynamic. You had some teams ahead of you do well, and obviously Penn State being able to pick up 4 out of 6 against Ohio State. That boosted their pairwise a little bit. UMass, the 2 wins they had over Providence, that boosted them. So despite the fact that Arizona State held serve and did everything they possibly could, they still aren't in that great of a position. And what's really interesting when I looked at it, they only have 4 games left, and that's it. There's no playoffs. So at the end of 2 weekends from now, Arizona State will know exactly kind of where they'll know their record. They won't maybe know their exact RPI. They'll have it within a few thousands or 10,000ths of a point, and they'll kind of know where they should stand in the pairwise at that point. But the reality is, what used to be, I thought that if Arizona State could just win, maybe 75% of their games down the stretch, they'd be fine. They might have to win their last 4 games because they played twice against Alaska Anchorage at home this weekend. Those are almost must wins because UAA being so far down, they're 56th in the pairwise right now and 56th in the RPI. So if you lose either of those games, that's going to be a hit to your RPI. And then you kind of looked at, okay, the last 2 games, they're going to be against Wisconsin. That you could lose one of those games. You could probably even lose 2 of them, but as long as you've taken care of business, you'll be fine. That's not so much the case because Wisconsin is now 37th in the RPI. So you lose a game or 2 to Wisconsin, and that could hurt you. I had done it if they would have win twice against Alaska Anchorage this weekend, then lose twice to Wisconsin. Right now, it would be a .5414 RPI at the end of the season for Arizona State. That would put them 14th in the current pairwise. That's the bubble, and you'd much rather be safe, much safer than that. So I think 3 wins these next 2 weekends are necessary, and they really have to get a sweep of Alaska Anchorage this weekend.
And that Wisconsin series by no means would be a gimme. Even though the Badgers have been disappointing, they're still loaded with talent, and a quick explosion could sink the Sun Devils if they don't watch out. Well, while we're talking about pairwise, why don't we go to that? There's something very interesting in the pairwise that has to do with head-to-head, and that's Minnesota Duluth in number 4, even though they trail Denver in the RPI. Those top 4, if it ended right now, Minnesota Duluth would be a first seed, like we mentioned earlier on. Minnesota State catching up to North Dakota in the RPI as well. That could be a race for the top, but those top 3 teams, North Dakota, Minnesota State, and Cornell, have a little bit of space between the rest of Division I hockey right now.
They have a lot of space. Those 3 teams probably should stay in the top 3, barring anything that's catastrophic, losing 4 or 5 straight games for any of them. I don't see that happening. You do point out, I think it's really interesting that if you look at just the RPI, Denver you'd think would be number 4, but it's the head-to-head matchups against Minnesota Duluth, and I believe it was a sweep they had down at Denver a few weeks back. That is actually now really what is the difference maker. It gives Minnesota Duluth enough points in the comparisons that they are now exactly 1 comparison ahead of Denver, and that puts them into 4th. I mean, you can go down the RPI straight down to 16, and really there's no discrepancy. I guess 16 and 17, Providence is the 17th RPI, but there's 16 in the pairwise. But there's not a lot of times you see teams get have an RPI that is shifted positionally. So if you're the 10th RPI in the country, you're usually 10th in the pairwise. That's just the way it works. But when you're from the same conference, you play a number of times, those head-to-head games matter so much, and that's a big part of why Minnesota Duluth is ahead of Denver.
At number 13, we mentioned that earlier, Maine has gotten way up into there. You mentioned a jump of 19 since the start of the year. If they can keep winning all the way out through, they may be in a position for an at-large, even if they don't take the Hockey East Championship.
Oh, that's true. That's for sure. They're going to have the games at home, or if they can win their next 4 home games, 2 against Vermont, 2 against UConn, it's not going to do a ton to help their RPI, but it'll do enough that they'll be in a pretty solid position where they could be up to 13, 12, 11, and then you're just hoping that they're on multiple upsets in the tournament. The games against Providence at the end, I mean, they'll be big for both teams. But if you just get a split of that series, with Providence, Maine's going to have themselves in great position. They'll be, if they go 5 out of 6 these last 6 games, they're likely hosting a quarterfinal series. Take care of business there. They are going to be a lock for the NCAA tournament if they keep playing the way they are.
A couple of teams that are really in trouble right now in the pairwise are Ohio State and Providence at 15 and 16. At least one of those would be bounced, and maybe both of them on the bubble, depending on the league championships.
And, say one of them gets in. If it's Ohio State, that's team number 2 for the Big Ten. Imagine Big Ten only having one team in. If, say, Penn State were to run the table in the tournament, win the tournament, it could be only Penn State that's going to the NCAA tournament from the Big Ten. Conversely, if Providence gets to the right side of the bubble with those teams we've mentioned, Maine, you mentioned, then you put Northeastern, Lowell, UMass, and Boston College. Hockey East could end up with 6 teams in the tournament right now. It is a good year when you're looking at, not just out of conference, but the fact that all of the top 8 teams that are qualified for the playoffs right now in Hockey East are 500 or above. You don't usually see a team in 8th place at 500 in Hockey East, but that's exactly the case. So it's been a decent year. I think that the ability for some non-conference wins, some quality non-conference wins to take place within Hockey East has helped. You can look at other conferences. Obviously, NCHC 3 out of 7 right now. If the season ended today, they still have Western Michigan knocking on the door down at 18. In the ECAC, they would have 3 out of their 12 teams, and if it ended as it is right now. So there's a lot of hockey left to play, but right now you're looking at some real division in terms of how many teams from each conference might make this tournament.
Well, and you're right about the NCHC, and Western really would have to have a good stretch. Below them, you have to go quite a ways down for another team in the NCHC, and that's Omaha at number 27. So 3 or 4 for the NCHC, but of course 4 is half your league, so who's going to complain about that, right? One last thing to look at, the news announced last week that Vermont head coach Kevin Sneddon was going to step down at the end of the season. His job looked to be in peril anyway. He gets to announce it on his own terms and says he's going to retire from hockey. He's not yet 50 years old. He's going to turn 50 this year. I'm sure there's going to be something in the future for Kevin Sneddon, but really, people forget what success there has been at Vermont, and people who don't know him don't understand what a terrific, just a great guy Kevin Sneddon is, too.
He's a fantastic man, a great ambassador of this sport. He did a great job when he served on the NCAA men's ice hockey committee. He's a friend of many. He really has done a good job, I think, at Vermont. And people, everybody always wants to kind of look at the down and the lacks of success, but his success, is pretty marked at that school. 3 NCAA tournament appearances, maybe that is something that people look at and say, boy, that wasn't enough. But he took their team to the Frozen Four and was less than a period away. I mean, that's a team that had a lead on Boston University in 2009 when BU, kind of that team of destiny, kept coming back and winning games in the NCAA tournament. They did that against Vermont that year, and then went on, obviously, to capture the national title. But the next season, right back in the tournament, I think they struggled in Hockey East that next season. I think they might have even finished 8th place in Hockey East, but they made it to the NCAA tournament as an at-large team because their out-of-conference was so strong. But he's had a lot of great seasons. You look at those 2 I mentioned, 20-win season in NCAA tournament in 2014, 22 wins. Somehow they didn't make it in 2014-15. And then, we don't have to go that far back. 2016-17, a 20-win season, a 2013-5 record. I believe it was a 6th-place finish still in Hockey East. But, I know that people are going to really remember this season. They haven't got a Hockey East win. They're, on pace to maybe break that record for the worst worst regular season mark in Hockey East history. I'm hoping they get a win to kind of avoid that. But everything he's done there has been on the up and up. He's a very good, very intelligent man. As somebody mentioned to me when I said I can't believe he would retire at 49, they said he does have a Harvard degree and he can probably go up and do pretty much anything else if he wants. And that is a fact. But I still feel like Kevin Sneddon has some years left in him. And maybe this has worn him down a little bit. These last couple of years of Vermont and, some of the tough seasons he's had. And, but at the same time, I see, him and, his future as being bright because he knows the game. He knows how to handle people. He really relates to people well, I think. And we'll see where this goes. But, for now, I wish him my best because he's not just a good coach and a good administrator and somebody that's done good in this league, but he's a good friend. And he's been one of the greatest people I've gotten to know in my times covering Hockey East.
Well, even though it's been a few down years at Vermont, it's still a great job for somebody who will fill that position. 4,000-seat Gutterson Fieldhouse is a great place to watch a game, and renovations going on there. The folks up in Burlington will pack that place again as things turn around. And certainly Vermont will be back and be a big part of Hockey East and on the national scene again.
I agree there, and they have a lot of potential. The one thing I will say is I do think that they need to find a way to increase some of the funding within the program. It's one of the lowest funded programs. The job there, one of the lowest paying, and you're living in Burlington. If assuming you're going to probably want to live in Burlington, that's not a very inexpensive city. That's actually a pretty expensive city in terms of being kind of having a small town feel to it. Not a cheap place to live. So. I look at that salary. I think it's around $275,000 a year right now in just salary alone. There can be some bonuses and stuff like that, but salary alone is not. It's, I believe, one of the two lowest in the league. I think they're going to have to be a little bit more competitive if they want to really attract a big name coach or attract somebody that can have an impact on that school. Because like I said, I think Vermont's a pretty expensive place to live, Burlington, Vermont. So that's something that the university, I think, Jeff Schulman's a very intelligent man, the athletic director there, and I think he'll be conscious of that. No doubt, but it's something that you really have to take into consideration if you want to build this program back up. It takes the commitment financially.
Well, that's going to wrap it for this edition of USCHO's Weekend Review. You can check out this podcast and our other two podcasts, Game of the Week and Spotlight, at uscho.com/podcasts. This episode has been sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.